I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today we continue with Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth by R. Buckminster Fuller. Section 2.4, Chapter 3, Comprehensively Commanded Automation. Then there came a time, which was World War I, when the most powerful out-pirates challenged the in-pirates with the scientific and technological innovation of an entirely new geometry of thinking. The out-pirates' attack went under and above the sea service and went into the invisible realm of electronics and chemical warfaring. Caught off guard, the in-pirates, in order to save themselves, had to allow their scientists to go to work on their own inscrutable terms. Thus, in saving themselves, the great pirates allowed the scientists to plunge their grand industrial logistics, support strategy, into the vast ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum that were utterly invisible to the pirates. The pirates until then had ruled the world through their extraordinarily keen senses. They judged things for themselves, and they didn't trust anyone else's eyes. They trusted only that which they could personally smell, hear, touch, or see. But the great pirates couldn't see what was going on in the vast ranges of the electromagnetic reality. Technology was going from wire to wireless, from track to trackless, from pipe to pipeless, and from visible structural muscle to the invisible chemical element strengths of metal alloys and electromagnetics. The great pirates came out of that First World War unable to cope knowledgeably with what was going on in the advanced scientific frontiers of industry. The pirates delegated inspection to their troubleshooter experts, but had to content themselves with relayed secondhand information. This forced them to appraise blindly, ergo only opinionatedly, whether this or that man really knew what he was talking about, for the GPs couldn't judge for themselves. Thus, the great pirates were no longer the masters. That was the end. The great pirates became extinct. But because the GPs had always operated secretly, and because they hoped they were not through, they of course did not announce or allow it to be announced that they were extinct. And because the public had never known of them, and had been fooled into thinking of their kingly stooges and local politicians as being in reality the head men, society was and is as yet unaware either that the great pirates once ran the world, or that they are now utterly extinct. Though the pirates are extinct, all of our international trade balancing and money ratings, as well as all economic accounting in both the capitalistic and communistic countries, hold strictly to the rules, value systems, terminology, and concepts established by those great pirates. Powerful though many successors to the great pirates' fragmented dominions may be, no one government, religion, or enterprise now holds the world's physical or metaphysical initiatives. The metaphysical initiative, too, has gone into competitive confusion between old religions and more recent political or scientific ideologies. These competitors are already so heavily weighted with physical investments and proprietary expediencies as to vitiate any metaphysical initiative. A new, physically uncompromised metaphysical initiative of unbiased integrity could unify the world. It could and probably will be provided by the utterly impersonal problem solutions of the computers. Only to their superhuman range of calculative capabilities can and may all political, scientific, and religious leaders face-savingly acquiesce. Abraham Lincoln's concept of right triumphing over might was realized when Einstein, as metaphysical intellect, wrote the equation of physical universe equals mc squared and thus comprehended it. Thus, the metaphysical took the measure of and mastered the physical. That relationship seems by experience to be irreversible. Nothing in our experience suggests that energy could comprehend and write the equation of intellect. That equation is operating inexorably, and the metaphysical is now manifesting its ability to reign over the physical. This is the essence of human evolution upon Spaceship Earth. If the present planting of humanity upon Spaceship Earth cannot comprehend this inexorable process and discipline itself to serve exclusively that function of metaphysical mastering of the physical, it will be discontinued, and its potential mission to universe will be carried on by the metaphysical endowed capabilities of other beings on other spaceship planets of the universe. The great pirates did run the world. They were the first and last to do so. They were the world men, and they ran the world with ruthless and brilliant pragmatism based on the misseemingly fundamental information of their scientifically specialized servants. First came their Royal Society scientific servants with their great second law of thermodynamics, whose entropy showed that every energy machine kept losing energy and eventually ran down. In their pre-speed-of-light measurement misconceptioning of an simultaneous instant universe, that universe as an energy machine was thought also to be running down, and thus the energy, wealth, and life support were erroneously thought to be in continuous depletion, originating the misconception of quote-unquote spending. Next came Thomas Malthus, professor of political economics of the Great Pirates East India Company, who said that man was multiplying himself at a geometrical rate and that food was multiplying only at an arithmetical rate. And lastly, 35 years later came GP's biological specialist servant, Charles Darwin, who, explaining his theory of animate evolution, said that survival was only for the fittest. Quite clearly to the great pirates, it was a scientific fact that not only was there not enough to go around, but apparently not enough to go around for even 1% of humanity to live at a satisfactorily sustained standard of living. And because of entropy and inadequacy, would always increase. Hence, said the GPs, survival was obviously a cruel and almost hopeless battle. They ran the world on the basis that these Malthusian Darwinian entropy concepts were absolute scientific laws, for that was what their scientifically respected intellectual slave specialists had told them. Then we have the great pragmatic ideologist Marx running into the entropic Malthusian Darwinian information and saying, well, the workers who produce things are the fittest because they are the only ones who know how to physically produce, and therefore they ought to be the ones to survive. That was the beginning of the great class warfare. All the ideologies range somewhere between the great pirates and the Marxists, but all of them assume that there is not enough to go around. And that's been the rationalized working hypothesis of all the great sovereign claims to great areas of the earth. Because of their respective exclusivities, all the class warfare ideologies have become extinct. Capitalism and socialism are mutually extinct. Why? Because science now finds there can be ample for all, but only if the sovereign fences are completely removed. The basic you or me, not enough for both, ergo someone must die, tenets of the class warfaring are extinct. Now let us examine more closely what we know scientifically about extinction. At the annual Congress of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as held approximately 10 years ago in Philadelphia, 2 papers were presented in widely separated parts of the Congress. One was presented in anthropology and the other in biology, and though the 2 author scientists knew nothing of each other's efforts, they were closely related. The one in anthropology examined the case histories of all the known human tribes that had become extinct. The biological paper investigated the case histories of all the known biological species that had become extinct. Both scientists sought for a common cause of extinction. Both of them found a cause, and when the 2 papers were accidentally brought together, it was discovered that the researchers had found the same causes. Extinction in both cases was the consequence of over-specialization. How does this come about? We can develop faster and faster running horses as specialists. To do so, we inbreed by mating 2 fast-running horses. By concentrating certain genes, the probability of their dominance is increased. But in doing so, we breed out or sacrifice general adaptability. Inbreeding and specialization always do away with general adaptability. There is a major pattern of energy in the universe wherein the very large events, earthquakes and so forth, occur in any one area of the universe very much less frequently than they do the small energy events. Around the Earth, insects occur more often than do earthquakes. In the patterning of total evolutionary events, there comes a time once in a while amongst the myriad of low-energy events when a large energy event transpires and is so disturbing that with their genuine adaptability lost, the ultra-specialized creatures perish. I will give you a typical history. That of a type of bird which lived on a special variety of micromarine life. Flying around, these birds gradually discovered that there were certain places in which the particular marine life tended to pocket in the marshes along certain ocean shores of certain lands. So instead of flying aimlessly for chance finding of that marine life, they went to where it was concentrated in bayside marshes. After a while, the water began to recede in the marshes because the Earth's polar ice cap was beginning to increase. Only the birds with very long beaks could reach deeply enough in the marsh holes to get at the marine life. The unfed, short-billed birds died off. This left only the long-beakers. When the bird's inborn drive to reproduce occurred, there were only other long-beakers surviving with whom to breed. This concentrated their long-beaked genes. So, with continually receding waters in generation to generation inbreeding, longer and longer beaked birds were produced. The waters kept receding, and the beaks of successive generations of the birds grew bigger and bigger. The long beakers seemed to be prospering when all at once there was a great fire in the marshes. It was discovered that because their beaks had become so heavy, these birds could no longer fly. They could not escape the flames by flying out of the marsh. Waddling on their legs, they were too slow to escape, and so they perished. This is typical of the way in which extinction occurs, through over-specialization. When, as we have seen, the great pirates let their scientists have free rein in World War I, the pirates themselves became so preoccupied with enormous wealth harvesting that they not only lost track of what the scientists were doing within the vast invisible world, but they inadvertently abandoned their own comprehensivity, and they too became severe specialists as industrial production moneymakers, and thus they compounded their own acceleration to extinction in the world-paralyzing economic crash of 1929. But society, as we have seen, never knew that the great pirates had been running the world. Nor did society realize in 1929 that the great pirates had become extinct. However, world society was fully and painfully aware of the economic paralyses. Society consisted then, as now, almost entirely of specialized slaves in education, management, science, office routines, craft farming, pick and shovel labor, and their families. Our world society now has none of the comprehensive and realistic world knowledge that the great pirates had. Editor's note, try not to get caught up on the use of the word slave, even though it's a little bit passé at this point. Moving on. Because world societies thought mistakenly of their local politicians, who were only the stooges of the great pirates, as being realistically the head men, society went to them to get the industrial and economic machinery going again. Because industry is inherently world coordinate, these world economic depression events of the 1920s and 1930s meant that each of the local head politicians of a number of countries were asked separately to make the world work. On this basis, the world-around inventory of resources was no longer integratable. Each of the political leaders' mandates were given from different ideological groups, and their differing viewpoints and resource difficulties led inevitably to World War II. The politicians, having an automatic bias... Okay, editor's note, that's a rather innocuous way to talk about, Hitler, but moving on. The politicians, having an automatic bias, were committed to defend and advantage only their own side. Each assumed the validity of the Malthusian Darwinian you or me to the death struggle. Because of the working concept that there was not enough to go around, the most aggressive political leaders exercised their political leadership by heading their countries into war to overcome the rest of the world, thus to dispose of the unsupportable excess population through decimation and starvation, the age-old lethal formula of ignorant men. Thus we had all our world society specializing, whether under fascism, communism, or capitalism. All the great ideological groups assumed Armageddon. Getting ready for the assumed inexorable Armageddon, each applied science and all of the great scientific specialization capabilities only towards weaponry, thus developing the ability to destroy themselves totally with no comprehensively organized oppositional thinking capability and initiative powerful enough to coordinate and prevent it. Thus, by 1946, we were on the swift way to extinction despite the inauguration of the United Nations, to which none of the exclusive sovereign prerogatives were surrendered. Suddenly, all recognized as such by society, the evolutionary antibody to the extinction of humanity through specialization appeared in the form of the computer and its comprehensively commanded automation, which made man obsolete as a physical production and control specialist, and just in time. The computer as super specialist can persevere day and night, day after day, in picking out the pink from the blue at superhumanly sustainable speeds. The computer can also operate in degrees of cold or heat at which man would perish. Man is going to be displaced altogether as a specialist by the computer. Man himself is being forced to reestablish, employ, and enjoy his innate comprehensivity. Coping with the totality of Spaceship, Earth, and universe is ahead for all of us. Evolution is apparently intent that man fulfill a much greater destiny than that of being a simple muscle and reflex machine, a slave automaton. Automation displaces the automatons. Evolution consists of many great revolutionary events taking place quite independently of man's conscientiously attempting to bring them about. Man is very vain. He likes to feel that he is responsible for all the favorable things that happen, and he is innocent of all the unfavorable happenings. But all the largest evolutionary patternings seeming favorable or unfavorable to man's condition reflexing are transpiring transcendentally to any of man's conscious planning or contriving. To disclose to you your own vanity of reflexing, I remind you quickly that none of you is consciously routing the fish and potato you ate for lunch into this and that specific gland to make hair, skin, or anything like that. None of you are aware of how you came to grow from 7 pounds to 70 pounds and then to 170 pounds and so forth. All of this is automated and always has been. There's a great deal that is automated regarding our total salvation on Earth, and I would like to get in that frame of mind right now in order to be useful in the short time we have. Let us now exercise our intellectual faculties as best as we can to apprehend the evolutionary patternings transcending our spontaneous cognitions and recognitions. We may first note an evolutionary trend that countered all of the educational systems and the deliberately increased professional specialization of scientists. This contradiction occurred at the beginning of World War II, when extraordinary new scientific instruments had been developed, and the biologists and chemists and physicists were meeting in Washington, D.C. on special war missions. Those scientists began to realize that whereas a biologist used to think he was dealing only in cells, and that a chemist was dealing only in molecules, and the physicist was dealing only in atoms, they now found their new powerful instrumentation and contiguous operations overlapping. Each specialist suddenly realized that he was concerned alike with atoms, molecules, and cells. They found there was no real dividing line between their professional interests. They hadn't meant to do this, but their professional fields were being integrated, inadvertently on their part, but apparently purposefully, by inexorable evolution. So as of World War II, the scientists began to invent new professional designations: the biochemist, the biophysicist, and so forth. They were forced to. Despite their deliberate attempts only to specialize, they were being merged into ever more inclusive fields of consideration. Thus was deliberately specializing man led back unwittingly once more to re-employ his innately comprehensive capabilities. I find it very important in disembarrassing ourselves of our vanity, short-sightedness, bias, and ignorance in general in respect to universal evolution to think in the following manner. I've often heard people say, I wonder what it would be like to be on board a spaceship. And the answer is very simple. What does it feel like? That's all we have ever experienced. We are all astronauts. I know you are paying attention, but I'm sure you don't immediately agree and say, yes, that's right, I am an astronaut. I'm sure that you don't really sense yourself to be aboard a fantastically real spaceship, our spherical spaceship Earth. Of our little sphere, you have only seen small portions. However, you have viewed more than did pre-20th century man, editor's note, or pre-21st century human. For in his entire lifetime, he saw only 1/millionth of the Earth's surface. You've seen a lot more. If you're a veteran World Airlines pilot, you may have seen 1/100th of Earth's surface. But even that is sum totally not enough to see and feel Earth to be sphere, unless, unbeknownst to me, one of you happens to be a Cape Kennedy capsular. Thus concludes section 2-4 of Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth by R. Buckminster Fuller. Tomorrow we continue with section 2-5, chapter 4, Spaceship Earth. I'll see you then. Alam.